The Vietnamese bread, a ubiquitously humble food found on virtually every street corner in Vietnam, from mobile carts to bustling market stalls and morning breakfast vendors outside schools, has repeatedly earned top honors on international street food rankings, garnering high praise from world-renowned chefs and leading culinary publications. Even more remarkably, the two simple words, banh mi, have been officially enshrined, untranslated, into the Oxford English Dictionary, standing alongside iconic global terms like pho, sushi, and taco. The profound irony of its journey is that this globally celebrated dish did not originate in a Vietnamese kitchen. Its arrival was a direct consequence of the colonial regime, the initial fascinating twist in its history. When the French imposed their dominion over Indochina in the late 19th century, they imported an entire European ecological system: cathedrals, sophisticated cafes, vineyards, and crucially, the baguette. Yet in those early days, this imported bread was strictly demarcated. It was not intended for the general Vietnamese populace. The original baguette served as the staple of French administrators, soldiers, and the collaborating local upper class. This colonial-era bread was significantly different. Robustly large with a dense, heavy crumb, a thick, chewy crust, and designed to be highly satiating. The primary barrier, however, was its prohibitive cost. The vast majority of Vietnamese people at the time, whose diet was fundamentally built around the comforting familiarity of rice, rice porridge, and various rice noodles, the baguette was an irrelevant, unattainable luxury. The dynamic shifted radically when the Vietnamese stopped simply consuming the French baguette and began to truly own its creation. By the early 20th century, especially in burgeoning urban centers like Saigon, the big market district, and Hanoi, local bakeries, often run by ethnic Vietnamese or Chinese operators, began springing up. This moment marked an extremely pivotal evolutionary step. The bread was re-engineered for Vietnam. The primary drivers were utterly practical. Vietnam's tropical, hot, and intensely humid climate was hostile to the original dense French loaf, which quickly became stale, moldy, or tough. Furthermore, the local palate was not accustomed to consuming such large quantities of heavy wheat flour. Crucially, making the interior lighter and airier not only solved the freshness problem, but also dramatically reduced production costs, allowing for widespread accessible sale. The outcome was a distinct culinary invention. A bread with a shatteringly thin, crisp crust and a beautifully airy, almost hollow interior. The resulting loaf was feather-light, supremely crunchy, and satisfying without being heavy. The Vietnamese had inadvertently created a version optimized for tropical conditions, superior in its suitability to the local environment. This was the precise moment the Vietnamese bread officially diverged from its French roots, even though its exterior silhouette remained recognizably Western. Culturally, the Vietnamese approached this new bread format as they would their staple rice, a vehicle that must be accompanied by savory food. Thus began the innovative process of stuffing the loaf with purely Vietnamese components. While ingredients like pâté were a French echo, they were adapted and prepared with local flair. Inside went slices of Vietnamese pork sausage, succulent marinated grilled meats, and a crucial array of cooling, crunchy pickled vegetables. Julienned carrots, green papaya, and cucumber. These were balanced with fresh cilantro, pungent chilies, and a drizzle of fish sauce or a dressing heavily derived from it. At this point, the bread ceased to be a simple side dish. It had transformed into a self-contained, complete, and balanced meal held conveniently in one's hand. The approach to consumption highlighted the cultural chasm. The French consumed their baguette slowly, seated at a table, pairing it perhaps with fine cheese, wine, or rich soup. The Vietnamese, adapting to the frenetic pace of urban commerce and labor, inverted this entirely. Everything was layered into a single loaf, clamped shut and consumed quickly, handheld, often while walking or working. This portability and completeness made this bread the perfect fuel for the burgeoning energy of Vietnamese city life. From this perfect adaptation, we arrive at the world-famous version of banh mi. So where does the Vietnamese bread stand when compared to other major bread-based foods globally? The defining difference isn't merely a subjective matter of which tastes better, but rather the fundamental philosophy of its construction. Consider the classic French baguette. Its role is centered on itself. It boasts a tight, springy, dense crumb that carries the full, heady aroma of wheat flour and yeast. It is designed to be the star. The French tear pieces off, dipping them in rich butter, consuming them alongside pungent cheeses, creamy pâté, or a glass of wine. The Vietnamese version, however, follows the exact inverse principle. The airy interior is intentionally fabricated to be a vessel. The crust is thin and fragile, serving primarily as a light, crisp envelope designed to maximize the volume and importance of the vibrant contents nestled inside. The contrast becomes even sharper when we compare it to the American sandwich, a different breed of bread usage altogether. American sandwiches often feature towering layers of thick-cut cold meats, cheeses, and generous spreads of mayonnaise. While delicious and decadent, the resulting density is intensely fatty, quickly satiating, and tends to leave the eater feeling heavy. Similarly, German bread stands apart in its philosophical weight and texture, famous for being heavy, nutrient-dense, and packed with whole grains. A single slice can provide the necessary energy for a whole morning's strenuous work. Even looking toward Turkey, we see a focus on density. Abundant, thin slices of rich charcoal grilled meat. What elevates banh mi to a unique status in the world of handheld foods is its treatment of greenery. It is arguably the rarest, perhaps even the only global sandwich format that treats fresh herbs and pickled vegetables as a core structural and flavor component rather than merely a garnish. This emphasis on freshness often startles Western consumers who are accustomed to breads dominated by heavy meats and high caloric density. When they bite into a Vietnamese bread, they encounter a fundamentally different experience. It is lighter, intensely fresh, and leaves a wonderfully clean aftertaste. Perfectly executed meal in a loaf is a study in textural and flavor harmony. Must always deliver the shattering crispness of the crust, the soft yield of the inner crumb, the savory saltiness of the cured meats, the creamy richness of the pâté, the tang of the pickled vegetables, the coolness of the fresh herbs, the slight heat of the chili, and the aromatic burst of cilantro. Crucially, no single ingredient is allowed to overpower the others. This masterful equilibrium is why the Vietnamese bread is uniquely adaptable. It can be enjoyed equally well for a quick breakfast, a satisfying lunch, a late-night snack, or consumed frequently without ever becoming tiresome. Beginning in the early 2000s, the banh mi stepped decisively beyond the culinary confines of the Vietnamese diaspora, evolving into a legitimate global gastronomic phenomenon. This wasn't a fleeting fad ignited by a brief social media wave. It has maintained a steady, persistent, and increasingly frequent presence across major international food journalism. What makes its rise so compelling is that it deliberately eschewed the high-end pathway. It entered the world stage authentically, exactly as it is, a humble sidewalk food. Around the mid-2000s, mentions of banh mi surged dramatically in travel narratives, transitioned from being an exotic curiosity to being regarded as a national culinary standard-bearer for Vietnam, proudly standing shoulder to shoulder with beef noodle soup and spring rolls. A significant milestone occurred when National Geographic included this bread on its prestigious list of the globe's best street foods. For National Geographic, this inclusion was driven not simply by deliciousness, but by the dish's profound ability to encapsulate a nation's cultural identity. They heralded it as a dish that simultaneously bore the scars of its colonial past while demonstrating the spectacular ability of Vietnamese cuisine to repurpose foreign elements. From the notoriously discerning UK publication The Guardian paid high tribute to banh mi. They described it using a highly impactful phrase, the seamless perfection between French technique and Vietnamese flavor. The Vietnamese took the heavy French loaf, subtly redesigned it, made it thinner, lighter, and then injected into that shell an entire ecosystem of native flavors. In the digital age, banh mi consistently appears on global food charts representing Vietnam. A remarkable number of high-profile content creators designate this bread as the absolute must-try food. Many openly confess to consuming it far more frequently than beef noodle soup. The rationale is entirely practical. It is effortless to eat, highly affordable, perfectly portable, and crucially, each vendor offers a slightly different, personalized variation. People no longer feel compelled to say Vietnamese sandwich. They state simply banh mi, a proper noun requiring neither translation nor footnote. There is a fascinating truth about culinary export. Not every delicious national dish translates successfully across borders. Beef noodle soup is notoriously difficult and resource-intensive to establish internationally. The Vietnamese bread operates under entirely different economic constraints. It is simple to open a stall, easy to make portable, and remarkably forgiving when localized. On a deeper philosophical level, this food serves as a mirror reflecting the fundamental character of the Vietnamese people. If one looks closely at its construction, it embodies the Vietnamese approach to life. It is non-ostentatious, inherently practical, avoids fussiness, and utilizes every resource efficiently. Taking a basic French loaf, the Vietnamese reduced the starch, augmented the vegetables and flavor profiles, and transformed it into an economical, perfectly complete meal. The true zenith of its global acceptance was the precise moment when international menus abandoned the reductive translation Vietnamese sandwich and listed it straightforwardly as banh mi. It is the ultimate validation, a modest, everyday food that now stands as an eloquent ambassador for an entire cultural history. Thank you for tuning in and following this remarkable story. If you found this journey interesting, please consider subscribing, enabling notifications, and sharing this video. For now, I bid you farewell.